get this. Today we are doing a deep dive, and well, it's going to get really cool. We're going to be taking a look at this article from Tom's Hardware about a tech tuber. And they decided to ditch, the usual way of cooling PCs like air cooling and liquid cooling.
Yeah. And
went with something a bit bigger, a little more extreme.
A little bit.
We're talking about liquid cooling, but using a full-blown air conditioner unit.
Yeah, it's definitely not what you see every day. And I think it's interesting that, it's not like they're just trying to get, 5 degrees cooler. This is like really going to the extreme.
And the results they're getting are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Like we're talking 20 degrees Celsius, like on a GPU, while it's under stress testing.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
But before we get into all that, who is this person who built this frosty Frankenstein PC?
So this is a Chinese tech tuber who goes by the name ESC. And it seems like, from the article at least, they have a real knack for pushing the boundaries of PC cooling. They already have a whole house liquid cooling system. They have multiple loops set up. This is just the latest in a line of, I guess, pretty wild PC cooling projects.
So they're not just, starting out with something small.
No.
They're really diving in head first. I want to know what this looks like. I'm picturing it in my head. I'm sure our listeners are too. But what does it actually look like?
So picture a normal PC tower, like pretty standard, and right next to it is this giant air conditioner unit that dwarfs the PC in size.
Wow.
It's definitely a visual that makes you do a double take.
I bet. I'm picturing a mad scientist lab. So what kind of hardware are they even cooling with this massive AC unit?
So for this test, they were using an RTX 4090, and that was paired with a Core i9-13900K.
Okay.
However, they're already prepping the system for the next generation, the 14900K and the RTX 5090. So it sounds like they're really expecting to have to manage a lot of heat.
That makes sense. All the rumors say that those new components are going to be very power hungry.
Yeah.
So was it just a simple plug in and play, or did they have to do something special to get it all set up?
It definitely wasn't just plug it in. There was a pretty serious modification process. The article mentions welding and custom pipe management. It sounds like it took a lot of engineering know-how to put together.
Definitely not for the faint of heart.
Right.
I can't imagine just anyone could do that. So they use and speaking of the AC unit, they use a Xiaomi KFR 35GW.
Yeah. It's a 12,000 BTU unit. That's, like a pretty decent size unit. And it draws about 1.2 kilowatts of power.
Wow. So it's almost using as much power as the computer itself.
Yeah, some PCs use more, some PCs use less, but that's, that's a good chunk of change just for cooling.
Definitely a case of go big or go home.
Yeah.
But the main question is, does it actually work?
Yeah.
You mentioned how cool the GPU was getting, but what about the CPU? Was it able to stay cool too under all that stress testing?
So the article mentions that after 40 minutes of running stress tests, the CPU cores only went up a couple of degrees from the starting temperature. So it really seems like this thing can handle pretty much whatever you throw at it.
Those are seriously impressive results. I wonder if this is what we are going to have to move to in the future as components get even more powerful.
Yeah, it really does raise some questions, right? Is traditional air or liquid cooling, even the really high-end stuff, going to be enough for the next generation of hardware? Could we start seeing, more outside-the-box solutions like this becoming normal?
Only time will tell. Before we go too far down the road of the future of PC cooling, let's talk about the reactions to this project. The comment section on Tom's Hardware was very active, a lot of opinions. It seems like there is no consensus on whether this is good or bad or if it's going to work.
I bet.
The comment section is always a very interesting place to gauge public opinion on things like this. What were some of the things you saw?
Oh, I'm sure it's all over the place. What were some of the bigger themes?
Well, some people were comparing it to data centers, how they have these massive cooling setups for all those server racks to keep them from, melting.
That is an interesting parallel. Because it really is, if you think about it, he's essentially made a tiny little data center for his components.
Yeah, and that does raise the question of if individual PC components are now needing this level of cooling, what's going to happen to PC cases and cooling solutions as we know them? Could we be moving to something like more centralized cooling systems? Something outside of the case?
Yes, it's a fascinating question. But not everybody thinks this is the future of PC cooling. There are quite a few people who are saying this is just not practical.
Yeah, and some people were pointing out, they were like, hey, this isn't even really air conditioning because he's not using the entire unit. He's just using the condenser as a big radiator for the liquid cooling loop.
Yeah.
So they're asking, why not go all the way Why not use the compressor too and get those temperatures below zero?
Yeah, if you're going to go this far, why not go crazy? You would need some pretty specialized equipment and coolant to do that, and condensation would be a big problem.
That reminds me, there was a thread I saw online, and people were talking about building PCs in mini fridges. They were like, hey, they're designed to keep things cold. What do you think about that?
Well, that's interesting. But mini fridges are not really made to be running 24/7. And if you try to use one to cool a PC, it tends to, die pretty quickly.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And then, you have to fit all the components and the airflow inside of a mini fridge.
Exactly, yeah. So while it might be fun to do as an experiment, it's probably not a practical solution long term. And, when you think about it, this type of cooling, it comes at a cost, it can be expensive, and the energy usage is a factor too.
Yeah, that's right. Using a 1.2 kilowatt air conditioner just to cool your PC
Yeah.
is not the most energy efficient setup. It does raise some questions about, the environmental impact of high-performance computing and if there are ways to keep things cool, but in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, I mean, as we keep getting more and more powerful components, figuring out how to cool them without, impacting the environment too much is going to be a big concern.
It seems like this project has opened up a whole Pandora's box of questions about PC cooling and where it's going.
It really has. It's great though. It shows how creative PC enthusiasts can be, and they are always pushing the boundaries of what is possible.
And it's starting conversations, which is great. Before we get too lost in, predicting the future of PC cooling, let's take a closer look at some of the more interesting aspects of this very unusual setup. So, we are talking about data centers and mini fridges, and I'm wondering, is there something in between those two, some kind of middle ground that would give us the power of a dedicated cooling unit, but be more practical for someone like me or you to actually use?
That is a really good question. And it's becoming more and more important as PC parts keep getting more powerful and hotter.
It feels like we're hitting some kind of limit with cooling.
Yeah.
We need to rethink the whole thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. We might be getting to the point where just slapping a bigger heatsink on or adding a few more fans just isn't going to cut it.
So what do we do? Are we all going to have to put air conditioners next to our PCs?
I hope not. I think the answer is going to be finding new and better ways to cool things down. Maybe we can adapt what we already have, or maybe we need to invent something completely new.
You were saying before that what ESC built isn't really true air conditioning because they're only using the condenser as a radiator.
Right.
Maybe that's a clue. Maybe we can figure out how to use air conditioning technology better, but in a way that's smaller and more efficient.
Yeah, imagine like a small self-contained unit that's specifically made for cooling PCs. It would use both the condenser and the compressor to get those super low temperatures.
Like some kind of super-powered liquid cooler. What about the noise, though? Yeah. Air conditioners are not exactly quiet.
Yeah, that's true. But I think if you engineered it right, you could make a system that's both powerful and quiet.
So you're thinking about a future where high-performance PCs come with their own little cooling units, like tiny data centers.
That could be the future.
It might not be as crazy as it sounds. I read an article a while ago about this company that was developing a liquid cooling system. It used a refrigerant, kind of like what's in your refrigerator.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea was to make a closed loop that could cool parts to below zero.
Yeah, that's phase change cooling.
Right.
We could see some really big improvements in that technology in the next few years. It's already being used in a few places, but the problem is making it affordable so regular people can use it.
It's like overclocking for cooling. Instead of pushing the components to go faster, you're pushing the cooling to get colder.
Exactly. And just like with overclocking, there's some risk involved. You have to think about condensation and whether the components can handle it, and you need special equipment.
But imagine what we could do if we could reliably cool parts to below zero.
We could get a whole new level of performance. Overclocking would be even crazier, and we might even see new kinds of components that are designed to run at those temperatures.
It's like science fiction coming to life. But even if sub-zero cooling doesn't become the norm, I think ESC's project shows us something important. Cooling is not just an afterthought anymore. It's really important for how well our PCs perform.
Absolutely. And as parts get more powerful and we cram them closer together, being able to cool them effectively is only going to get more important.
It's kind of funny when you think about it. We want faster and more powerful technology, but that makes more heat. And then we have to come up with even more complicated ways to deal with it.
Yeah, it's like a never-ending cycle.
Push the limits, then figure out how to keep things from melting down.
Exactly.
There was this one comment in the Tom's Hardware article that I thought was really interesting. Someone said, why not use the air conditioner's compressor, not just the condenser? Then you could potentially cool the PC coolant down to below zero. That's next level.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild idea. It would be really tough to do, but you could get some serious cooling power that way. It's like putting a jet engine on a bicycle.
Yeah, it does make you think about the risks of pushing cooling to such extremes.
Yeah, it's all about finding a good balance. You want the best performance, but you also want your PC to be stable and last a long time.
I guess everyone has to decide for themselves how far they want to push it. For some people, it's all about breaking records and seeing how far they can go. For others, it's about finding that sweet spot where their PC runs well and they don't have to worry about it breaking.
That's right.
It's all about finding what works for you.
Absolutely. And let's be real, it can get pretty expensive to experiment with this stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. But you know what I really like about all of this? It's the fact that people like ESC are out there trying new things, thinking outside the box. It's inspiring.
Yeah, I agree. It shows how creative people can be when they're passionate about something. And it reminds us that sometimes big innovations come from people just messing around in their garage, not from some big company or lab.
Maybe one of these crazy experiments will lead to the next big thing in PC cooling.
You never know. There are so many examples in the history of computers where something started as a crazy idea and then became the standard.
I think it's safe to say that ESC has earned some bragging rights with this build. It's making people think differently about PC cooling.
For sure.
And it sparked a lot of interesting conversations.
Absolutely. But let's not forget about our listener. We've talked about a lot of technical stuff, but what does it all mean for someone who's building or upgrading their own PC?
That's a good point. We've covered a lot of ground here, but what are the key takeaways for someone who's actually working on their own PC right now?
I think the most important thing is to remember that cooling is not something you should just think about later. It's something you need to consider from the very beginning when you're planning your build.
So what are some things our listeners should keep in mind when they're planning their next PC build?
Well, first of all, do your research. Figure out how much heat your parts are going to make and what kind of cooling they're going to need.
You mean look beyond just the speed and the number of cores and pay attention to things like TDP?
Right, exactly. And don't be afraid to get a better cooling solution than you think you need.
It's always better to be safe than sorry when it comes to heat.
Absolutely. And remember, cooling isn't just about the cooler itself. You also need to think about airflow in your case. Make sure your case has enough ventilation and that your components are arranged so air can move around freely.
And don't forget about cable management.
Oh yeah, that's important. All those cables can block airflow and make things hotter.
It's kind of amazing how much goes into cooling a PC.
Yeah, it's a whole science.
And it's becoming even more important as our PCs get more powerful.
Absolutely.
So next time you're building or upgrading your PC, remember, cooling is king. A cool PC is a happy PC. It runs smoother, faster, and quieter, and it's less likely to break down.
That's right. It's an investment that's worth it in the long run.
So whether you're a pro or just starting out, remember, cooling matters. Don't ignore it if you want a great computing experience.
And hey, if you're feeling brave, maybe try something a little out there, like ESC did. You might just come up with the next big thing in PC cooling.
Yeah, innovation comes from people who are willing to try new things. So keep those CPUs cool and keep those ideas coming.
And on that note, let's wrap things up. We've talked about ESC's crazy setup, the future of cooling, and some practical tips for our listener. But before we say goodbye, I think it's worth taking a moment to reflect on something that really struck me about this whole story.
What's that?
It's the contrast between how complex modern computers are and how simple ESC's solution is. It's like using a bulldozer to open a can of soda, but somehow it works.
It definitely makes us rethink what we think a PC cooling setup should look like. It's almost like a work of art, saying something about how much we demand from our technology.
Yeah, and it reminds us that sometimes the best solutions aren't always the fanciest or most complicated ones. Sometimes it's about thinking differently, even if that means using something as unexpected as a giant air conditioner.
This whole conversation has really made me realize how important cooling is. It's easy to get caught up in the specs and the numbers, but without good cooling, all that power is wasted.
It's like having a race car with a bad engine cooling system. It might be fast for a little while, but eventually it's going to overheat and stop working.
So what's the one thing we want our listener to remember today?
Be proactive about cooling. Don't wait until your PC is overheating and crashing before you start thinking about it. Plan ahead, do your research, and invest in a cooling solution that can handle your hardware.
And remember, cooling isn't just about preventing problems. It's about getting the most out of your PC and making sure it lasts a long time. A well-cooled PC runs better, faster, and quieter, and it's less likely to break down.
It's worth it in the end.
So, whether you're a seasoned PC builder or just starting out, remember, cooling is crucial. Don't underestimate it if you want a great experience with your PC.
And hey, if you're feeling adventurous, maybe take a cue from ESC and try something a little different. You never know, you might just discover the next big thing in PC cooling.
That's right. Innovation often comes from people who are willing to push the boundaries and think outside the box. So keep those CPUs cool and keep those imaginations running.
Until next time, happy computing.
It's amazing, right? This whole thing with the air conditioner, it just makes you think.
It really does. I mean, on one hand, you have these incredibly complex computers.
Right.
And then he just slaps an air conditioner on it. It's almost funny, but it works.
Yeah, it's like he's saying something about technology. You know, we're always pushing for more power, more speed, but then we need these crazy solutions to keep everything from melting.
Exactly. And it shows that sometimes the simplest solution can be the best one, even if it seems a little ridiculous at first.
This whole deep dive has really made me think about cooling in a new way. It's easy to get caught up in all the specs and benchmarks, but if your PC isn't cooled properly, it doesn't matter how powerful it is.
That's a great point. It's like having a super fast car with a terrible engine. It might look impressive, but it's not going to get you very far.
So before we wrap up, what's the one big takeaway for our listeners today? What do they really need to remember about cooling their PCs?
I think the most important thing is to be proactive. Don't wait until your computer is overheating and crashing before you start thinking about cooling. Plan ahead, do your research, and get a cooling solution that can handle the heat your components are going to generate.
And cooling isn't just about preventing problems, right?
No, not at all.
It's about getting the most out of your PC and making sure it lasts as long as possible. A well-cooled PC will run better, faster, and it will be quieter too. And you'll be less likely to have parts fail on you.
Exactly. It's an investment worth making.
So to all our listeners out there, whether you're a PC building expert or just starting out, remember, cooling matters. Don't underestimate it if you want the best possible experience with your computer.
And if you're feeling adventurous, maybe try something a little out there, like our friend ESC did with his air conditioner PC. You never know. You might just stumble upon the next big thing in PC cooling.
You're right. Innovation often comes from people who aren't afraid to think differently and try something new. So keep those CPUs running cool and keep those creative juices flowing.
Until next time, happy computing.